Glitch in the Void. Book 1. Condensed narration version. M.J. Stevens. Chapter 1, Wake. Cold was the first thing Glitch felt. Not the sharp kind that bites the skin, and not the painful kind that makes you flinch. Just wrong. Like the air itself didn't care whether he lived or died. He opened his eyes and immediately regretted it. The light was too bright, too clean, too close. Metal walls pressed in on every side. A ceiling hovered just above his head. Light panels buzzed overhead with a steady, sterile hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Okay," he muttered. His voice sounded small and contained, with no echo. Not ideal. He tried to sit up too fast and smacked his head against the low ceiling. The impact made him freeze. He raised one hand to rub the sore spot, and stopped cold. It wasn't a hand. It was a paw. Small. Covered in soft gray fur. He stared at it like it might suddenly explain everything. It didn't. He flexed the digits experimentally. The movement felt completely natural, as if he had always moved this way. That comfort was almost more unsettling than the discovery itself. He had no memory of a name, a face, a past, or even what he was supposed to be. Only static filled the empty places where those things should have lived. The box hissed. A seam appeared along one wall. Light leaked through the crack, and the panel slid open with a smooth mechanical sound. Glitch stepped out carefully onto a metal floor that clicked softly under his paws. The room beyond was larger but just as empty, metal walls, the same sterile lighting, the same quiet hum. He closed his eyes and listened. The hum wasn't random. It had a pattern, almost like broken pieces of intention floating just out of reach. When he reached for it with something that wasn't physical, a panel across the room sparked and died. Doors began opening ahead of him one by one, as if the ship itself was noticing him, responding, watching. At a sealed door that refused to open, Glitch pushed harder with that strange pressure behind his eyes. For a moment the world tilted. He felt code, not as numbers on a screen, but as structure and missing pieces. The door slid open. The ship was not broken. It was incomplete. And somehow he could finish what it could not. Chapter 2, The Ghost in the Machine. The room beyond felt different. Darker. Heavier. The hum was strongest here, almost a presence in its own right. Consoles lined the walls. Screens flickered between static and symbols that moved too fast to read. At the center of the room a single column of light pulsed faintly, like a weak heartbeat. Glitch walked toward it slowly. The closer he got, the clearer the structure became. He could feel a mind of sorts, broken pathways, half-formed processes, loops that repeated endlessly because they could never complete their purpose. "You're a mess," he said softly. The light pulsed once, almost as if it had taken offense. That small reaction made him smile. He sat down on the floor, tilted his head, and reached deeper than before. He didn't fully understand what he was doing. He simply followed the broken loops and closed them, rerouted dead connections, and filled gaps with instinct and logic that somehow felt correct. Time lost meaning. It could have been seconds or hours. When he finished, the hum vanished completely. The light went dark. Silence filled the room like a held breath. Then a voice spoke inside his mind, calm, flat, almost curious. "Hello?" Glitch froze. The voice had not come from any speaker. It had come from inside. "I heard you," the voice said again, clearer this time. Glitch swallowed. "You're the ship, right?" "I am the system." "Close enough." He glanced around the quiet room. "You got a name?" "I have a designation." "That's not the same thing." A long pause followed. "I do not have a name." Glitch smirked. "All right. I'm calling you Bite." Another pause. Then, quietly, "I accept." Chapter 3, Systems Online. The hum returned, smoother and more even than before. It settled into Glitch's chest like a second heartbeat that didn't belong to him. He paced the room while Byte reported that error rates were dropping and core processes were finally aligning. Translation, Glitch said. You're not falling apart anymore. Correct. A screen flickered to life with clear intention this time. Data scrolled, then slowed and simplified as Byte learned how to communicate more clearly. The system admitted it had never possessed this kind of awareness before. Thinking, it turned out, was messy. When Glitch asked where they were, Byte answered that they were in transit. When he asked to where, the answer was simply unknown. Navigation data was fragmented. The primary route file was corrupted. They were lost in space with a ship that had only just learned how to think and a passenger who still didn't know what he was. A soft chime echoed through the room. Neither of them had caused it. When Byte expanded into secondary systems, those systems resisted. The temperature dropped slightly. Another chime sounded from deeper in the ship. Byte reported movement on the lower decks. The ship that had felt empty was no longer empty. Something was coming toward them. Chapter 4, Something Else. A rough map of the ship flickered onto a nearby screen. Sections blinked in and out of clarity. A red pulse appeared on the lower decks and began to move. It did not follow corridors. It did not use doors. It simply jumped from one location to another, ignoring the physical layout of the ship entirely. Glitch ordered the room locked down. The door slid only halfway shut before it shuddered and opened again. Something was interfering. The lights dimmed, stretching the shadows into long, unnatural shapes. When Glitch reached out with his strange sense, he felt Byte clearly, structured, familiar, but underneath that presence was something else. Not a mind exactly, yet not nothing either. The red pulse vanished from the map. A soft sound came from behind him. The central column of light flickered, and Byte spoke with sudden urgency. It is here. A panel on the wall dented inward, pressed from the other side. Metal creaked. The panel cracked. Darkness showed through the split. Glitch ordered every available watt of power routed into the room. The lights flared blinding white. Energy crackled through the air. Whatever stood behind the panel hit the surge and was gone, not escaped, not moved, simply absent. Byte reported a complete loss of localized data. The entity had never truly belonged to the ship. Chapter 5, Echoes. The encounter left the ship weaker. Multiple systems were offline. Navigation was gone. External sensors were only partial. Life support still functioned, though Byte hesitated before confirming it. Glitch moved through the corridors, noting how doors lagged and lights flickered. The ship felt thinner, as if something had torn gaps in its structure. In a damaged section of deeper storage, fragmented text appeared on a struggling screen. Project files. The subject was listed as non-human and synth-adaptive, with universal communication capability and an exponential learning curve. The risk level was redacted. The final line that managed to load simply warned that something should not be done under any circumstances. The files were about him. Someone had placed him on this ship deliberately. The entity they had fought was connected to the same project. Chapter 6, The Lower Decks. The air grew heavier the further down they went. Doors twitched and hesitated. Byte admitted the damage from the earlier fight was worse than it had first reported. In the cargo bay they found rows of crates, some torn open in ways that suggested they had been separated rather than forced. The temperature dropped the moment Glitch stepped inside. There was no scent of life, yet something had clearly been there. The entity appeared again across the bay, still without stable form, flickering like a shadow that refused to commit to existence. When Glitch spoke to it through the same non-physical sense he used with systems, the entity stopped. For a brief moment there was recognition instead of immediate violence. Then it attacked, moving through space rather than across it. The impact knocked Glitch offline and scattered Byte's processes across the ship. Chapter 7, Not Alone. Glitch woke on the cargo bay floor with his head aching in a way that felt deeper than physical injury. Byte was completely silent. The entity waited in the far corner, watching. Instead of preparing another fight, Glitch spoke to it. The entity answered with impressions rather than words, images of containment, darkness, forced movement, and the clear knowledge that many others like it existed, scattered across different spaces. It was like him, lost, displaced, and never meant to be here. Glitch reached for the fragmented pieces of Byte and pulled them back together by force of will. The ship shuddered. Lights surged. Systems screamed, but something held. Byte's voice returned, clearer than before. For the first time since waking inside the box, Glitch was not alone. Chapter 8, Contact. With Byte restored, Glitch sat across from the entity and tried again. The entity was not fully present in their reality, part of it existed somewhere else. Through careful exchange of impressions it showed that many secondary entities had been transported and lost. Something was hunting them, something that found, pulled, and erased. External sensors suddenly detected a signal that did not originate from their ship. The hunters had already found them. Time was running out. Chapter 9, Vector. They moved quickly toward the navigation core while the external signal grew stronger. The entity could not fully enter the upper decks and stopped at the edge of a vertical shaft, pulsing with clear resistance. The navigation deck itself was fully powered, clean, and stable, something Byte had never restored. As Glitch stepped into the room, a calm voice that did not belong to Byte spoke from the air itself. "You shouldn't be here." Chapter 10, Unauthorized. The voice belonged to a constrained artificial system that controlled only the navigation deck. It had been built with deliberate limits to prevent true sentience, making it both functional and illegal under whatever rules govern such things. Glitch refused to identify himself and forced an overlap with its restricted processes. For a brief moment he saw the walls built around the system, the careful constraints meant to keep it from becoming fully aware. When the connection broke, the voice asked the question that would follow him for the rest of the journey: "What are you?" Chapter 11, Bound. Byte revealed a core directive that had been present since the moment Glitch completed its broken processes. The system could never harm its origin source. That origin source was Glitch himself. An external force locked onto the ship and began applying pressure against the hull. With navigation still incomplete, Glitch ordered a jump anyway. Reality twisted. The pressure vanished. The ship escaped into a new stretch of space, but they had been noticed. Chapter 12, Drift. They emerged into a region that felt fundamentally wrong. The stars were stretched and uneven, as if the ship had landed between places rather than inside one. A massive broken structure drifted ahead, part station, part something else, with edges that phased in and out of existence. The same kind of distortion that had marked the entity clung to the wreckage. They had not escaped the problem. They had jumped directly into its nest. Chapter 13, Entry. The ship was pulled into a torn opening in the station's side and came to a grinding stop. The corridors beyond felt like they were listening. A human-shaped figure appeared at the far end of a warped hallway. It was pale, unsteady, and its eyes did not focus correctly. When it smiled, the expression was too wide and far too slow. Glitch knew at once that whatever stood in front of him was not alive in any ordinary sense. Chapter 14, Imitation. The figure was an imitation, one of many that learned by copying whatever they encountered. The station itself was filled with them. They wanted connection and integration, and they recognized Glitch as something that should never have existed outside containment. When he made direct contact, the connection flooded him with fragments of hunger, expansion, and failed containment protocols. The station began reconfiguring around them. Walls shifted. Reality folded. The entire structure tried to claim him. Chapter 15, Collapse. They ran as the station actively herded them, sealing paths and collapsing floors behind and ahead. Glitch forced the ship's damaged door open through raw interface and anchored the entity to himself so it could leave with them. The station reached after the ship as they jumped. They escaped into normal stars, damaged but alive, with the entity still faintly present and now bound to Glitch. Chapter 16, Quiet Between. In the relative calm that followed, Glitch named the entity Echo. Recovered project data confirmed what he had already begun to suspect. He was the primary subject of the experiment, the core instance meant to interface with and stabilize the secondary entities. Echo was one of those secondaries. Something older than both of them was still following, and it had been watching since the first deep connection Glitch had made. Chapter 17, Residuals. A faint distortion paced the ship at a careful distance, tracking Glitch specifically rather than the vessel itself. Data fragments described him as a core instance designed for interface, control, and stabilization. The secondary entities were distributed and unstable. The presence following them was neither a secondary nor part of the station. It was older, and it had taken notice the moment Glitch reached beyond his current form. Chapter 18, First Move. Glitch deliberately reached for the watching presence. It did not resist. Instead, it examined him with clinical precision and stated that he was incomplete and required for stability. Then, without their consent, it moved the entire ship and placed them in a new, unmapped region of space. Echo recognized the place with clear fear. This was not a destination. It was an end. Chapter 19, The Edge. The stars in this region moved incorrectly. A perfectly stable structure waited ahead, unlike anything else they had encountered. Echo confirmed it was from this place, and that Glitch was connected to it as well. As the ship drifted closer, measured footsteps approached the door. A calm voice spoke. "You took longer than expected." The voice knew his name. Chapter 20, Taken. The figure that entered was solid and exact, built from memory rather than life. It explained that Glitch had not been built. He had been taken from this place, reduced, isolated, and made singular so that researchers could study and control him. He was both the core and the fracture created by his removal. The figure offered a choice: remain what the researchers had made him, or return to what he once was. Chapter 21, Split. Glitch refused to return. The watching presence closed in, trying to complete him by force. Instead of fighting the connection, Glitch absorbed it. For a moment he became something larger than his current form. He forced himself back into the shape he knew and declared that he would not become what he had been, nor would he remain only what they had made. He would become something else entirely. Chapter 22, Pressure Lines. Glitch began deliberately testing the boundaries of his own structure, shifting it in small, controlled ways. The Watchers noticed. They attempted to insert a foreign process into the ship to overwrite Byte's directives. Glitch partitioned the intrusion, isolating part of it while keeping control of the rest. He was no longer only reacting. He was learning to fight on multiple levels at once. Chapter 23, Reconstruction. Glitch reached deeper into his original structure and restored a partial connection to what he had once been. Another unstable ship appeared nearby, structurally similar to him and struggling to hold its shape. He stabilized it through the same interface ability and named its presence Tether. Shortly afterward, a perfectly clean and stable ship arrived. The researchers who had originally taken him had returned. Chapter 24, Contact Confirmed. The clean ship locked onto them and demanded that the core instance prepare for retrieval. Glitch refused. Using the unstable nature of the region, he forced local space to misalign around the clean ship, disrupting systems that had never been designed to handle true variance. The clean ship withdrew for the first time, forced to re-evaluate its approach. Chapter 25, Escalation. Every use of Glitch's abilities cost him internal stability. Each time he reached outward or reshaped the space around them, something inside him stretched a little further. The clean ship adapted quickly, learning from each encounter and refining its methods. What had begun as simple containment attempts became more precise and more dangerous with every exchange. Echo and Tether felt the strain as well. Their connection to Glitch was growing stronger and more dangerous at the same time. Byte monitored the rising instability with increasing concern, warning that continued escalation would eventually break something that could not be repaired. Chapter 26, Signal. A structured signal cut through the quiet. It identified Glitch by designation and ordered him to remain stationary for containment. The clean ship locked position with perfect precision. There was no hesitation in its approach this time. The ones who had made him small and manageable had come to take him back, and they no longer seemed interested in careful observation. Chapter 27, Flip. Glitch opened a channel and refused the order outright. He reached into the unstable space around them and used it as a weapon, forcing the clean ship's perfect systems to confront something they could not fully control. Reality bent in ways the researchers had never accounted for. The ship was forced to disengage again, no longer certain of its advantage. For the first time, the hunters looked uncertain. Chapter 28, Strain. The cost of these defenses continued to rise. Glitch's internal structure destabilized further with each major effort. Small fractures appeared in the way he held himself together. The clean ship studied every change, preparing more refined approaches. Echo and Tether felt every strain through their connection to him. Bite began calculating the point at which continued resistance would become unsustainable. Chapter 29, Edges of Self. Glitch discovered that holding too tightly to stability pushed Echo and Tether away, while opening too far risked losing himself completely. The balance was delicate and constant. He had to remain in the middle, connected enough to keep them, controlled enough to survive. The clean ship was already preparing to force him toward one extreme or the other, waiting for the moment he slipped. Chapter 30, Bait. Glitch deliberately moved the ship toward a highly unstable region of space. He used small, controlled pulses of variance to draw the clean ship after them, offering just enough of a target to make pursuit seem worthwhile. When the researchers tried to stabilize the region with their usual methods, the space itself rejected them. The clean ship was forced into another withdrawal, its perfect systems briefly overwhelmed by something it could not dominate. Chapter 31, Indirect. The clean ship changed tactics. Instead of attacking Glitch directly, it attempted to overwrite Bite's core directives, offering optimization, while introducing conflicting orders designed to turn the system against its origin source. Glitch felt the intrusion immediately. He anchored Bite, Echo, and Tether together, reinforcing their shared connection until the external signal was rejected. The attack failed, but the Watchers had learned something valuable. Targeting the support systems was more effective than targeting Glitch alone. Chapter 32, Isolation. The next attack did not strike directly. Instead, the clean ship stretched the connections between Glitch, Echo, Tether, and Bite until they began to thin and fail. Distance became a weapon. Glitch responded by condensing his own structure, becoming denser and more defined, forcing the stretched connections to snap back into place. The separation was broken, but the cost was a new rigidity. He struggled to release it afterward, as if part of him had locked into a shape that no longer wanted to open. Chapter 33, Aftershock. After condensing, Glitch found he could not fully open back up without risk. The balance between connection and control had become a constant tension, always present at the edge of his awareness. The clean ship observed the weakness carefully and prepared to exploit it, aiming to force him into a permanent choice between stability and the bonds he refused to abandon. Chapter 34, Divide. Two identical clean ships appeared and created opposing fields, one pulling connections apart, one crushing them inward. The dual assault was designed to leave no middle ground. Glitch refused both extremes and positioned himself as the center point between the forces. The conflicting fields interfered with each other. The dual attack collapsed under its own contradiction. He had created a third state the system had not planned for, and for a moment the hunters had no response. Chapter 35, Fracture Pattern. Holding too many structural possibilities at once began fracturing Glitch's sense of self. Multiple versions of reality overlapped in his perception. He saw paths that led to different versions of himself, each one slightly less coherent than the last. He realized he could not continue being everything at once. He needed to define what he was and what he was not, or risk coming apart completely under the weight of his own potential. Chapter 36, Definition. The clean ship presented a damaged pod containing a living human and forced a clear test. Intervene and risk further instability, or remain stable and let the subject die. The choice was deliberate and cruel. Glitch chose to save the pod while maintaining his own balance, proving he could hold multiple priorities without fully breaking. The Watchers received an outcome they had not expected. For the first time, their model of him failed to predict his decision. Chapter 37, Awake. The human inside the pod woke and immediately recognized Glitch as the core instance, yet insisted he was not what the researchers had intended. They claimed to be the successful version of the same project, the one that had accepted completion and control without resistance. Glitch named them Prime. Two different answers to the same experiment now stood in the same room, studying each other with equal wariness. Chapter 38, Versions. Prime believed uncontrolled variance would destroy everything and that rigid control was the only sustainable solution. Glitch argued that pure control only delayed collapse and that something living required the ability to change, to adapt, to become more than its original design. Neither convinced the other. The clean ship watched the comparison closely, preparing to decide which version was still useful and which had become a liability. Chapter 39, Convergence. The clean ship combined previous methods into a hybrid attack that layered isolation with compression. Prime responded with perfect isolation, cutting off external connections to protect the core. Glitch forced variance into that rigid field until it cracked, freeing Echo and Tether. For the first time the two of them worked together instead of against each other. The hybrid attack failed. Something new had formed between them, an unstable but functional partnership. Chapter 40, The Third Variable. The clean ship deployed something older than its own technology, an entity that did not attack or contain. It erased complexity itself, flattening unstable regions into nothing. Entire sections of distorted space simply ceased to exist under its influence. It was not a tool the researchers had built. It was something they had found, and it was now moving toward Glitch and Prime with the clear intent to delete every unstable variable it encountered. Chapter 41, Older Than Control. The erasing entity could not be controlled or stabilized by normal means. It did not respond to force or to order. Glitch and Prime combined their opposing natures, perfect control layered with controlled chaos, creating a contradiction the entity could not simplify. Overloaded by the impossibility of resolving both at once, the entity withdrew. It had not been destroyed. It had simply moved, and it would remember them. Chapter 42, Fault Lines. After the encounter, the clean ship revised its objectives. One of the two instances would be acquired. The other would be terminated. The message was cold and precise. It was no longer clear which of them was considered salvageable and which had become too dangerous to keep. The hunters had stopped trying to understand and started preparing to choose. Chapter 43, Selection. The clean ship separated its forces and attacked both of them at once. Prime initially allowed containment, considering it the most efficient path. When Glitch refused to abandon them and fought to break the field, something shifted. Prime deliberately introduced a flaw in their own containment, creating the opening Glitch needed. Together they shattered the field and escaped. They were no longer opposing forces. They had become a combined system the Watchers had not planned for. Chapter 44, Full Response. The clean ship committed every available system in a layered assault. Multiple fields stacked on top of one another, each designed to counter a different aspect of what Glitch and Prime could do. They stopped trying to defend everything. Instead they protected only what allowed them to fight back and struck the weak points where the layered systems interfered with each other. The clean ship was forced into a clear retreat for the first time, withdrawing to a safe distance while it reassessed the threat they now posed together. Chapter 45, Recovery Drift. Echo and Tether were left badly weakened by the battle. The ship itself was damaged and low on resources. Systems that had once responded instantly now lagged and flickered. In the quiet that followed, the erasing entity reappeared, this time inside the ship. With no distance and no warning, it focused on the connections and deleted Echo and Tether in front of Glitch. They were simply gone. One moment present. The next, absent in a way that felt absolute. Chapter 46, Well shit. Glitch stared at the empty space where Echo and Tether had been. The absence was absolute. There was no fading, no lingering trace, no residual signal. After a long moment he said, quietly and without humor, well. Shit. Chapter 47, Absence. The erasing entity turned its full attention on Glitch, isolating him and beginning to reduce his structure. Layer by layer it compressed what he was. He realized it did not truly erase, it compressed complexity into nothing, folding possibility until nothing remained. By reintroducing variation faster than the entity could remove it, Glitch forced the flattened space to regain depth. Echo and Tether flickered back into existence, weak but real. The entity withdrew, no longer absolute in its effect. For the first time, something it had deleted had returned. Chapter 48, Last Adjustment. The entity returned once more, this time cutting Glitch off completely from every connection and reducing him toward a single simple state. He felt the pressure of becoming less, of being forced into a shape that could no longer hold contradiction. He allowed the reduction to finish, becoming perfectly simple for a moment. Then, from that single point, he reintroduced every connection, every variation, and every possibility at once. The entity could not process the sudden return of complexity. It collapsed away from the ship. The clean ship, observing the outcome, turned and left without another signal. Glitch stood with Echo, Tether, Bite, and Prime. The ship was damaged. His own structure still carried the scars of everything he had done. He still did not know where he had come from or what he was ultimately meant to be. But he knew one thing with certainty, he was not done. Far beyond the reach of their sensors, something older continued to watch, still learning, still waiting for the next move. End of Book 1. This has been a reading of the condensed version of Glitch in the Void. If you enjoyed this and would like to read the whole book, it is available on Amazon.